Welcome back for another strategy video on Clans of Caledonia. My name is Ollie Helm. Several people have asked for my thoughts as it relates to bidding in the auction, so let's tackle that subject in this video. Specifically, what is an appropriate number of points to bid? And is there a way to tell if we are overbidding? Right off the bat, let me mention that if you're not consistently scoring close to the level of points that the top players are achieving, then you will have far more to gain by improving your overall play than by getting the clan that you want. That is because even if you get the best clan and go first in the game, the top players will still have a very strong chance of beating you with the weaker clan because of their better gameplay overall, and because you're giving them a head start in scoring due to your negative points from the auction bid. Before we discuss the auction format, just a quick reminder that when not playing with the auction, the first player is determined randomly and gets to choose the first available clan. As compensation for picking the clan last, the last player then gets to play the first worker down and play the first move of the game, which theoretically is supposed to balance out the advantage of picking the first clan. I haven't played much without the auction, so can't speak to this balance of the game, but it is probably fair to say that there is a perceived imbalance in clan strength. Enter in the auction, which is an optional part of the game that attempts to address the unfair nature of being the first person to pick a clan. Here's a question. What exactly are you bidding for? This may be obvious, but just in case, let's spell it out. The auction basically lets the players determine what value they place on picking the first clan and being first player. Interestingly, there is also an auction variant where the turn order is predetermined, which has the effect of making it harder to determine an optimal auction amount. As we'll see in a moment, it is sometimes difficult to distinguish benefits coming from the clan versus benefits coming from being first player. Here's the next question. How much is choosing the first clan worth? The ability to score well with a clan is dependent on several factors. I encourage you to have a look at my strategy videos pertaining to the individual clans for specifics, but in general, factors include the board layout. For example, Robertson is better when there are more deltas. The available ports. For example, Cunningham is better when there's a basic port. The available glory tiles. For example, Stewart is better when the first glory tile is for upgrades. The available export contracts. For example, McEwen is better if the right combination of export contract and basic port shows up in the game. Starting goods. For example, McEwen and Mackenzie are better when starting with 2 wheat. And lastly, the opponent clans. MacDonald might be better if facing off against McEwen and Mackenzie. Because of all the variables, it is not really possible to place a point value on any one factor. We will need to guess at a point value based on anecdotal evidence on how the top players are bidding. The next question is, how much is first player worth? Once again, the value is going to depend on board layout, ports, contracts, and opponent clan, but practically speaking, there are 3 big advantages to being first player. The first advantage is that you get to place your worker down first. Placing your first worker first means you are guaranteed to get access to the best hex on the board, which typically will be next to the best port on the board. In some board layouts, there may only be one good location next to the best port, increasing the value of going first. For example, on this board layout, there are 2 good round 1 ports. The basic port can be accessed by 3 quality locations, so there's no rush to place a worker next to it. However, the 10-pound port only has 1 quality location. There are 2 1-pound force hexes on the edge of the lock, but if you don't get the island hex, then you are looking at an extra 4 to 8 pounds in shipping costs to get to the port. Clan MacDonald is at a slight advantage here, as they can take the force hex and then place a fisherman in the lock. The second advantage is that you get to place your second worker down last, assuming Clan Ferguson is not in the game. Placing your second worker last means you can place in a way that gives you access to the most cheap hexes without competition. For example, using the same board as before. 5 workers have already been placed down, and blue must place their second worker. Because of the way that the red and black workers were placed, there is a large corridor of open space. The first person to get there will have an advantage. One thing that makes the Forest 3 hex a good choice is that from here, blue can reach the basic port, but also can expand cheaply to the right or to the top of the board. The third advantage is that you get to make the first move of the game. Getting the first move of the game often means you pick the best contract on the board, or if after worker placement there is immediate competition for a key hex, then you get to expand to that key hex first. Let's go back to the same game as before. Looking at the contracts, there is one contract that is far better than all other contracts, the 3 wool contract. Based on how I value the contracts as defined in the contract strategy video, the 3 wool contract is the third best possible contract at the start of this game out of the 50 available, given the glory tiles on offer. The 2 wool, 1 cheese, 1 whiskey contract seems good, but is in fact only the 19th best contract, and then the 3 wool, 1 whiskey contract is the 25th best contract. Well, unfortunately, just like with clan choice, it is really hard to put a value on being first player. So let's look at the anecdotal evidence to see if we can glean anything useful. This chart shows the distribution of bids for each point amount from the top players for the games in my database. The big bar on the left is for 0 points, meaning the player got the third pick. That in itself is instructive because in 1/4 of all games, the top player thought it was better not to overbid the other players, showing that just because you are a strong player doesn't mean you can just outbid everyone, especially when playing another strong player. Let's zoom in on the bids. Other than a minor anomaly at 13 points, there are 2 basic bumps in the distribution. These loosely relate to what players are willing to bid for being first, around 18 points, and being second, around 10 points. The relatively high number of 13-point bids may be because there was a weaker advantage to being first or a stronger advantage to being second. So anecdotally, we can see what an appropriate bid might be, but there is still a lot of variation. Sometimes it is worth bidding 24 to be first, but then other times only 13. It depends on the factors described earlier in this video. That brings us to the next question. How do we know that these bids are a reliable indicator of value? Or, another way to put it is, how can we tell if we are overbidding? Let's go back to my database of games and look at the average game scores for each clan before auction points are subtracted. There's a fairly large spread in average scores between the best and worst clans. Now, we subtract the average auction bid to get a final game score average. And look at how much the spread compresses. Robertson is still in its own world, but the other 8 clans are now only 8 points apart. Remember though, what you bid is highly variable because of the many factors, so looking at the scores grouped together is a bit misleading, as averages might mask any underlying trend. Let's look at the data by splitting it based on starting positions for the auction, which I will use as a proxy for the quality of the game setup for that clan. So, for example, games where the auction winner chose Robertson means there was a better game setup than Robertson was chosen as the second clan. This table has a lot of information in it, so let's walk through it one piece at a time. Each section is broken into 3 groups representing whether the clan was chosen first, second, or last. Robertson is the clan chosen the most, and for fun, I created a popularity value which shows the weighted average starting position for that clan, ranging from 1, meaning the clan is always picked first when available, to 3, meaning it is always picked third. No new information here, it just confirms what we have seen before, that Robertson is a very strong and popular clan. By the way, all the clans appear in the BGA games with approximately the same frequency, so the fact that Robertson is chosen by the top players significantly more than the other clans and almost double as often as McEwen, Mackenzie, and MacDonald, is because the top players think it is worth bidding for the clan and winning the auction. Next, we can see the weighted average final position at the end of the game, again ranging from 1 to 3. The thing to pay attention to here is that regardless of whether top players are starting first, second, or third, they are getting the same final results. That suggests that the auction bids are fairly priced. If the bids were too high, I would expect that the average position would be worse for first or second player compared to starting third. And if you're curious, the 1.2 to 1.3 difference is actually closer than it looks. Up next are the average auction bids for each starting position. This part of the table largely confirms the average bids that we saw in the bumps on the distribution graph. More importantly though, let's subtract these values from the raw game scores to get the final game score. The average game score results confirm that we can use the auction to estimate the clan quality, and thus the theoretical value of the clan. With every clan, the average score is higher when it is chosen first, compared to being stuck with the clan as the last choice. Let's focus in on the final game scores. Looking at the scores across all clans, it is remarkable how close they are. Once again, if there was overbidding, I would expect the scores for first or second player to be lower than for third player, which represents the base case since there are no points lost to auction. In fact, one could argue that the bids could be higher for first player. And in reality, it is likely that players would be willing to bid a few points higher, but they didn't need to since the opponents dropped out of the auction. So, simplistically, for the two things that you are bidding for, clan choice and first player, if we accept that the two are equivalent in value based on how game order is determined when there is no auction, then each is worth about 10 points. But then you need to make adjustments based on the game setup. Some final observations on the final game scores. First, Robertson is a really good clan, and it looks like it is underbid based on the average across clans. Second, McEwen is also really good if you can get the right starting setup. The problem, though, is that it doesn't happen very often. Third, while Mackenzie and MacDonald rarely get picked first, that doesn't mean you cannot win with those clans. If the other clans were bid too high, you still have a great shot at winning. Fourth, there might be a little bit of overbidding for Cunningham and Ferguson, as the average points for first player are lower than for third player and the overall average. Fifth, the average position for the clans shows that the top players can win with any clan given any order. Therefore, the auction mechanism does a really good job of forcing players to give up points in order to play the better clans. One last chart I want to show is how bidding occurs for the non-top players. These players score about 30 points less per game on average compared to top players. But what is interesting is that they exhibit a similar pattern to the top players as far as auctions are concerned. You can ignore the values for Mackenzie, first player, for both top and other players, as the count is only 1. Looking at the data, first, other players are bidding a similar amount of points as top players for first and second player. Second, the other players also exhibit a slightly higher score for first and second player, suggesting that they are not overbidding, except for maybe Cunningham by a bit. The other players seem to intuitively know what an appropriate bid is. It's just their basic gameplay that is weaker. For the last part of this video, I want to go back to the game setup from earlier one last time and discuss what actually happened in this game. First, the board layout is not great for MacDonald because there is no large central lock. Second, there are two good ports, the 10-pound port and the basic goods port. The basic goods port is really nice for Stuart because it means you can use all 5 merchants to sell goods, earning a lot of extra first round income compared to the other clans. Third, the first glory tile is for edge spaces, giving MacDonald a slight advantage, as it'll be easy to get at least 2 fissures on the edge for cheap, given the 2 key ports. Fourth, for the contracts, there is one contract that is much better than all the rest. In addition, there is one hex that is better than all the others for the first worker placement, as was discussed earlier in the video. So it pays to be first in this game. Also, related to the contracts, there is only one decent contract on the board after the 3 wool contract, and no contracts poor. So the game setup is poor for Buchanan. So, to sum it all up, the game setup is significantly better for Stuart than the other two, and you can gain a huge advantage by being first player. This is an example where I would probably bid more than 20 points to get Stuart. In this game, Stuart went for 24 points, MacDonald for 8, and Buchanan for 0. The first worker was placed on the minor 1 hex as expected, and the first move was to take the 3 wool contract as expected. And the final score? Incredibly, MacDonald won in a tiebreak against Stuart. There is a link in the video description for anyone who wants to watch this game on BGA. That completes my thoughts on bidding during the auction. If you would like my perspective on valuing a particular game setup, send a link to the game from BGA in the comments and then I can respond with my thoughts. Thank you for watching and listening to this video. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments and check out more Clans of Caledonia strategy videos in the links below. Happy playing!